GraphQL really sings at large scales. So a lot of the work we've been doing at Apollo over the last few years has been addressing the needs of development teams at very large organizations that are sitting in top of thousands of APIs.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Front End Fire, the weekly show that helps you stay up to date on the latest and the greatest in the front end world. I am your host today, TJ Van Tol, and I have Paige Niedringhouse with me.
Hello, everybody.
And today is a special episode. We have an interview episode, and we have on the show Matt DeBergalis from Apollo. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So for people that have not heard of you before, you want to tell people who you are, where you're from, why you're famous, all those good types of things?
Well, my name is Matt. I'm from Boston. I'm not sure I'm famous, but I suppose I'm here to talk about Apollo and GraphQL. We're an open source startup that's basically the company behind GraphQL, and we've been at that for really since the rise of GraphQL, 2015, 2016.
Awesome. Well, GraphQL has come up on this show a few times here in recent weeks, so I really want to dig into it. But maybe you can just start by giving us a background for newer people, just to set the ground level here. Maybe you could tell people about what is Apollo, what do you do? Maybe also give just the basics of GraphQL. So for anybody new that doesn't know, why would you even pick GraphQL? Maybe you could just sort of start us there.
Yeah. Let's see. Maybe I'll give you the story in two parts. One about us, the company, and then one about the technology and how they come together. We actually began the company as Meteor. If you're familiar with Meteor.js, that was us. And our vision with Meteor was how do you build a modern JavaScript app, right? Something that's running in the browser, feels really high quality. Real time is a big part of that. And this all, dates back to 2011, 2012. It was kind of black magic when things like Google Maps had come out. It's like, how'd you make the browser do that? What's going on?
Yep.
It's hard, right? Was the punchline. So we thought there needed to be some kind of a framework or a platform that would make that possible. One of the big pieces inside Meteor was a data layer. And it was the part that essentially synchronized the server and the client. So in Meteor, you didn't have to write a bunch of spaghetti code to update your screen or call APIs. You wrote, at the time it was a MongoDB query, and that query got stapled to the UI components. This is before React, so we had a very similar system inside Meteor called Blaze. And the pairing of those two was just magical, right? Like there's no code. You write some components and you write some queries. They're both declarative, and the infrastructure does the work for you. One challenge with Meteor was it was specific to Mongo, and we kept getting requests for, hey, I want this, but on top of my REST APIs or my SQL-database or whatever it would be. So I was in the market for a query language, and this is the same moment when Facebook first started talking about GraphQL. And for Facebook, this all came out of the mobile development world. They had experimented with a couple of different approaches for how do you get a high-performance mobile experience. Every piece of, every byte on the network is really important. Every piece of processing on the client is really precious. And so same team that had done React and some of the other app platform stuff stood up and talked about this query language, GraphQL. And the timing was perfect. It was technically what we needed, something that wasn't connected to a specific database. There was also at the time a really strong tailwind behind React and just sort of the Facebook stack and Facebook engineering. The problem was that Facebook's implementation was a little peculiar. There's a version of that still out there called Relay, but it was really a all or nothing proposition. They think of Relay as a whole framework that you build your app around. And so Apollo is an implementation of this GraphQL idea that was really designed from the beginning for the React developer. It was designed for something you could adopt quickly and incrementally, and not in a world of Facebook where you've already got a graph, but in a world of like normal, microservices and APIs and just the mess of the stack that's out there. And, we've really just turned the crank on that ever since. So Apollo's really an open source collection of libraries and SDKs. There's a lot of tools that make GraphQL really special and delightful. If you've used it, you'll know what I'm talking about. Maybe we can get a chance to talk about some of that. And what we found is that GraphQL really sings at large scales. So a lot of the work we've been doing at Apollo over the last few years has been addressing the needs of development teams at very large organizations that are sitting in top of thousands of APIs. They are responsible for not just one app, but a whole portfolio of stuff. And what GraphQL ends up being at the heart of it is it's a query language for APIs. It's a way to talk to all of your APIs declaratively, right? Going back to the Meteor point, instead of having to write a bunch of imperatives or procedural data fetching code. And I think that explains really the whole value prop to a team. It's all the good stuff that comes from any declarative architecture. There's a lot of joy when you have good tools. There's a lot of efficiency. The execs like it because it's cheaper and safer than the handwritten alternatives. It's the same story as so many other parts of the stack. And it's just been really fun because, at the end of the day, the reason I do this, the reason, really everybody at Apollo is doing this is we want a world full of great software. And, my feeling is the long pole, the thing that makes software hard is this step of connecting it to all the APIs that make it go. We've had so many advances on the UI front, right? Not just React, but think of all the amazing technologies and think about where we were 10 years ago compared to where we are now. We're still calling APIs, that part hasn't changed much. So we just feel like it's a place where we can make a pretty big impact on the kind of stuff people can build and the quality of that stuff, and makes a better world.
It's funny you bringing up Meteor, JS. I totally remember Meteor, and I do absolutely remember the wow factor of seeing that, because that was still in the era where that sort of stuff, we take some of that for granted now, the like real-time nature of web apps, but at the time it was a mind-blowing demo. Unfortunately, I did not get to use it like in a production setting, but I remember seeing conference talks and all of that about that. So I actually totally didn't realize that you had evolved from that. Yeah. I didn't realize it was the same project behind that. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and the reason I'm going to guess that you didn't get to use it in a production setting is that by its design, Meteor was sort of an all or nothing, everything in the box. That Mongo there's still a vibrant community, and it's about a lot of rapid application development. A lot of designers love Meteor, right? But if you're walking into a place that already has APIs or already has a code base, it just wasn't relevant. And I guess the other half of the story that I didn't talk about is we needed a query language, but we also needed that to be a separate component that you could bring to your existing stack. And so Apollo, was really shaped by the experience we had where we wanted something incrementally adoptable, something that you could put in production that met, teams where they were, instead of painting a picture of what could be. And I'm a pragmatist at heart, and I've certainly learned the lesson more than once that it's stuff that is easy to adopt and solves your problem today that really tends to go the furthest. So we've tried to hew to that.
Well, that actually was one of the questions that I wanted to ask you, because I haven't worked with GraphQL like in any large scale format since probably 2018, 2019, maybe. And a lot of it was because I was on an existing team that already had APIs. They already had ways to connect and fetch the data that they needed. So like re-architecting our whole system to use GraphQL queries and just rewriting it really was not something that we had the time or the ability to do. So
yeah, totally.
How does Apollo make that work with, existing REST APIs or SQL databases or MongoDBs? Like, is there a way to really bring all that together and use what you have?
Yeah, it's really interesting because if you think about a technology like React, part of why I think it was so successful is that from the point of view of how does a team adopt it, it's a pretty simple story, right? It's one team's concern. You can do it just with one component, not even a whole screen, right? You can just pick one little piece of your HTML empire and move it over. And if you like it, then you move on. If you don't like it, no harm, no foul. And to a degree, like APIs are just fundamentally not like that because they are at a minimum about connecting two different pieces of code. So you need a handshake. You need a coordination across teams, and that's a much different proposition. And GraphQL, I think, goes even further because if you think about what a graph is, maybe we can talk about how this stuff works at some point. But the punchline is GraphQL works by modeling all your APIs as a set of objects that are connected together. And we call that a graph, right? Like a mathematical graph with nodes and edges. And then the query language is written on top of that graph. So you can traverse the graph. And you can do it any way you want, which is great because every time you're building a UI, you probably want a slightly different combination of things that are in that graph, a different collection of fields on different objects, right? And you don't have to write new APIs in this world. You just write a new query. That's great. But because it's a graph, there's a network effect. The thing is more and more interesting the bigger it gets, or to say it a different way, most people don't want lots of independent GraphQL stuff. That sort of violates the basic idea, right? And so adopting GraphQL pretty quickly turns into an even higher strategic conversation. A lot of teams correctly see it as a rendezvous layer in the stack, and so they want to think about it for a minute, which is wonderful if you think about where that'll take them, but not so great if you're going for really quick and easy, what can I do today? What can I do tomorrow? So as strange as this sounds, a lot of what we've been doing at Apollo is about lowering the temperature and making the whole proposition just not just easier, but more straightforward might be a way to put it. Mm-hmm. One example of this is we have been, most people have REST APIs. There's some other stuff out there, but like if you think about the typical app and what it sits on, it's mostly REST. And even a lot of databases will give you a REST interface. So you can use that 99% of the time. If you go to the GraphQL.org website and just read like how to use GraphQL, it doesn't offer you a lot because GraphQL is this abstract query language. So there's this really complicated thing you have to do before you can use GraphQL, which is you have to basically convert all those APIs into this native GraphQL format. And there's probably 30 different language libraries out there that purport to help you, and you have to learn about words like resolvers. This is all just downstream of Facebook didn't have REST APIs, so they never thought about this stuff particularly, right? It wasn't relevant. That turns out to be pretty slow and painful. And I think that's true for a typical front-end team, but it's also true if you put yourself in the shoes of an engineering executive of a large company and you walk in and say, we're gonna adopt GraphQL, which starts with changing all our APIs to GraphQL. They're gonna politely show you the door because APIs don't get changed all that often, and that doesn't sound like a wise investment. So what we've really pushed for is a way to use GraphQL directly on top of REST APIs. And this is a bit of a new idea. We have an approach called connectors, which lets you declaratively, in just a little bit of text, describe each REST API that you've got in terms of those objects that make up the graph. It's a very different way to think about GraphQL, but it's the kind of thing we work on, and there's a lot of computer science underneath to make that work, because if you do it sort of the silly way, it sends you right off of a cliff or into a brick wall, depending on your preferred analogy. But done right, we can bring this magical experience to whatever typical API stuff you've got today. And the reason that's so important to me is, like, I know GraphQL makes sense at scale. I've worked with large company after large company that's gone through a painful transition to this technology because they have no other choice. Like, it's the only way they can ship software fast enough. It's the only way that they can make something at scale that feels like it was built by a single team and that customers like. But it's just a bummer if they have to rework a lot along the way. I want to reach the app teams much earlier when they're first building the app. But to do that, you have to make a fair case that it's going to be quicker than just writing another backend for front end or just writing some query fetching code. And I know that it's the right long-term architecture, but that's not enough, right? Nobody wants to take their vitamins in the morning. So, especially in this day and age, right? Like, budgets are tighter and like, got to ship what you got to ship. So almost everything we're doing at Apollo now is really about asking, how do we really make this just a delightful fit with the reality of a typical, React code base or a Cocoa code base sitting on top of the typical stuff you've got out there. And I think, like, if you talk to a developer that does use GraphQL, they'll just go on and on about how great it is. Like, you get strong typing in your UI, and you get, like, the whole thing is semantic. AI works great with this stuff. Like, it's just night and day. So just painting that picture quickly and giving people some great tools to get there is really important.
I mean, I think the fact that you have just said that you don't have to rewrite your entire backend to use GraphQL queries and that you can just put this connector on top of it that translates that REST API would make it so much more palatable for so many more companies or teams, because that's a lot less of a lift than creating an entirely new interface to interact with a database.
And it's also, there's a lot of, in the early days, I think this is true for so many technologies, but in the early days, there were different ways people thought about using something like GraphQL. The thing that's emerged as the killer use for it is this query layer that sits on top of the APIs you've got. And, sometimes I think technology just kind of has to go through the baking process a little bit to figure out where it really fits best. There are a lot of folks that were exploring GraphQL in other settings. Maybe GraphQL gives us a way to talk to a lot of databases without having to use database-specific query languages. Maybe. I don't think that turns out to be the best fit. Maybe we can use GraphQL for, like, east-west communication between services. Maybe. But GraphQL is really designed to connect apps to APIs. Like, that's the sweet spot. And the more we focus on that, the more we find exactly the kind of thing you're getting at is where we can make headway, because now it becomes clearer that there's a focused way to use it. We're certainly committed to that direction. It can't involve big rewrites, or it's just not gonna spread too quickly.
So one thing that's come up on this show over the last few weeks is just GraphQL and the hype cycle, because GraphQL, I feel like, went through a period of, like you just said, people were trying to use it for absolutely everything. It was the hot new thing. And it feels like more recently there's been some kind of I guess like almost like normalization coming back down off that like super high hype to start thinking of what's more realistic use cases. So we've talked about different projects moving away from GraphQL, like Redwood.js is they're kind of backing away a little bit from their GraphQL implementation. The blogging platform, why am I struggling, Paige? What's your blog written on?
Gatsby.
Gatsby usage is kind of fallen off. And
well, I think that's a Gatsby issue, probably.
Yeah, it mostly is. But that was something that some people complained about, was that it was only GraphQL was the only way to access data with it.
Well, and that's sort of what I'm wondering if it is, because I'm with you that where I've seen GraphQL work is in big situations, because you really gain the appeal when you have everything going through it. And I'm wondering if you see some of these other projects that are struggling with GraphQL a little bit more, like they're trying to use it in more of an isolated case so people just see less of the value. Does that seem like a reasonable theory to you?
I think it's always important to understand what your end user wants and needs. And I think sometimes the flaw is when you push something on end users because it makes sense to you or it's good to you. And I think one example of this is we saw early on with GraphQL a lot of excitement about using it as the public interface to something. GitHub did this, a number of others did too, and it's interesting. I think GitHub's original announcement talked about, we have big API payloads, and so it costs us a lot of money, like compute resources, to serve these, and with GraphQL we don't have that problem. Well, that's good for GitHub. But if you're somebody calling GitHub's API, you were probably just perfectly happy with the API, and being asked to use a new kind of technology that didn't immediately benefit you, maybe that's not the right way to bring people along. And I think what you said really hits the nail on the head. We talk about GraphQL in terms of it's an orchestration technology. If you think about, Kubernetes is about automating how you deploy software in a container world. We used to write code for that, but we don't anymore. Well, that's what GraphQL is for API calls. If you think about the code that calls APIs, you have to do it in a certain sequence. You've got to chain API calls together. You've got to transform the results. Maybe there's some caching in there. Maybe there's like an async conversion in there. All this stuff, the plumbing, that's orchestration of API calls. If you're only talking to one API, there's less of that to do, and so it's less of a pain point. If you're building on 10 or 20 or 50 APIs, it's a must-have. And I think the place where this ends up being so valuable is app dev, because you're building apps on a bunch of APIs. Less so if you're just thinking about a piece of SaaS like a GitHub or a Gatsby engine where, hey, I just need to call an endpoint and get back a result, and I know exactly what I'm going to do with it. It's when these things are used in combination that I think it becomes really interesting. And I don't know, it just goes back to the thing where leading with the technology usually doesn't work. Usually you've got to lead with the problem. How does this make life better for people? In their terms, on their terms. And I think like the place that's going to bring GraphQL to the front is going to be the people building software. It's app development. It's mobile app development. I think it's going to be AI development next. We could talk about MCP and AI. It's people pulling on all the APIs that are out there and how they want to use them and how they want to use them in new ways that brings this thing along. And so I really want to keep our focus at Apollo on that community, the app devs, right? The front end devs, because that's where the value is going to come, and that's what's, I think, going to ultimately make the call on what technologies are really the ones that become part of the modern stack.
Yeah, and we both have experience working in some bigger enterprise companies, and I also know firsthand that lots of times those hard enterprisey types of problems where you have all these different APIs that are written through different things and that you have to integrate, those aren't the sexy problems. Those aren't the things that your headlining tool on Hacker News is necessarily solving.
Yeah.
But it's also like incredibly valuable both on both ends. If you're an enterprise developer and you get a tool that actually genuinely makes your life easier because I used to work with APIs that had SOAP-based interfaces, and I was using Java to generate those things, and man, the amount of money I would have paid to have like an easy interface to query data from that would be just immeasurable. And so we don't focus on it a lot, but there is just a ton of value there because it is an extremely hard problem.
Yeah, and it's got to be both. I think the technology that doesn't work at scale in the enterprise ultimately is going to wither on the vine. I mean, Kubernetes won, not Swarm, right? Like it's stuff that works at scale. Otherwise, it's a dead end. But it's also got to be relevant to developers in the moment. It's got to have a great user experience. All the other things are important too, because you don't get to walk into your company and mandate a piece of technology if you're the CEO anymore. It just doesn't work that way.
There'll be a revolt.
Yeah, exactly. Or a revolt, or they'll just ignore you, I think is
right.
Yeah, that's
keep working with what they got.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's actually a good segue. I want to hear about what how you think GraphQL and Apollo do fit into the AI, the LLM, the MCP conversation that's going on right now. Where do you see that slotting in or helping to move it along?
Yeah, this is really exciting because what MCP really means is everybody now agrees that AIs have to be able to talk to stuff. They've got to make API calls. That's how you talk to stuff. And, we were pushing on this idea for a while, and it was amazing to me how a lot of people were still trying to get their head around that. It's like, well, no, we have RAG, like we can vectorize what's in the database. It's like, you don't build apps directly on your database, right? Like you call APIs to do stuff. And so now I think it's basically a foot race to go figure out the AI stack. Like we had a LAMP stack, right? There's going to be an AI stack. There's going to be a set of components that you'll have your choice at each layer, but there's going to be 3 or 4 sort of essentials that make up a modern AI stack. And what I'm excited about is if you think about what AI is good at and where it needs something complementary, GraphQL really seems to fit the bill. One example is AI is just fundamentally freeform. Every interaction, every prompt that comes from a customer may well lead to a slightly different use case or a different set of things that the agent may reasonably want from all of your APIs. So there's this agility requirement, and customers are going to expect the AI to get better every day. We're just in a completely different pace than we were with app devs. So I think that's a strong nod to a declarative architecture, because if you're writing code, even if the AI is writing code for you, it's just too much to bear. Another one is you need something semantic, right? Because the AI is really good at understanding things that have structure, and here's where GraphQL shines. It's self-documenting. It's got strong types. It's got doc strings. It's got comments. It's got, again, a structure that the AI can navigate. And it turns out LLMs are very good at, if you handed a GraphQL schema, it will go figure out how to crawl over the schema to write the query that the user probably wanted. There's also this interesting thing around, call it determinism. Put yourself in the shoes of a bank that wants an AI agent. And it's kind of a natural thing, right? I call people if I need to do things at my bank account. Maybe I can talk to an agent instead. Well, you probably don't want the agent telling one user one thing, and then the next time a user shows up, they get a different experience, right? Like if I want to know about my recent transactions, it's probably going to have to be the same number of transactions in the same order with the same properties of each. Mm-hmm. So you need some layer of the stack that provides you that determinism so that the AI isn't off free-forming, what it wants to do each step of the way. And also it turns out, the more tidy you keep the context for the AI, the more regular the experience will be. If you just throw the whole entirety of what your APIs return to the AI, it gets lost. Mm-hmm. It sort of wanders off all over the place. So you add all that up, and I think it makes a lot of sense to use a graph as the abstraction layer between the LLM and all of the existing APIs that are out there. That's what we're doing with Apollo. So we have an MCP server that is basically a front door to the graph for an AI, and it's the right place to enforce rules. What's AI allowed to see or not see, and in what combination. It gives you a way to do all that without writing code, so you can be super agile about it. And it also gives you the regularity, the precision, so that you can build real experiences. Because the thing I hear, it's fun to hack on AI. I think we all do it. But when I go talk to the teams inside bigger companies that are all scrambling to figure this out, right? Everybody's got AI projects up and running. The thing they come back to is we can't just YOLO it. We're gonna have to do this in a responsible way. And that's sort of caught between a rock and a hard place, right? They know everybody else is going super fast, but they also know, again, if you're a bank, right, and you just ignore some of these issues, there's regulatory problems, right? There's security concerns. firing offenses if you do this the wrong way. So we're going to do a ton this year on this. I think it's really exciting because, again, like I said, we want there to be more software in the world. AI is the greatest gift toward that mission in a generation. And if we can help people use that, and I use software very loosely, it may not be like screens with, forms and buttons and all that anymore, but it's still going to be software and it's still going to help people. So it's fun to think about a world where that stuff actually does have a way to connect to all of the APIs we built, and certainly what I want as a customer of all these companies, right? Like, and I think we all do at some level.
Yeah, this hits home pretty hard, basically everything you said, because so Paige and I work for a company called Blues. We have an API. And so when MCP came out, of course, we're looking into it, as is every company out there in the world. And
right.
We have some stuff running on MCP. Like if you look at our GitHub long enough, you could find it. But we're also not shouting that stuff from the rooftops, because what we realized is that it immediately makes for a very cool demo. Like you show it internally and you're like, oh man, how cool is this? Think of all the things we can do. But then that next step from, okay, I have that cool thing that I can impress my coworkers with, to like, okay, this is a product we can offer in our production software that our users can trust. There's a huge gap there. And it's not only like the deterministic part of it, but it's also like there's security, huge security considerations that go into this as well. And so you realize that like, okay, like the potential is there. So you get the hype is real because everybody can see the actual value of this. But then that gap that you're talking about between that and production deployable things that your bank and your insurance company can use, there's still that gap there. But I still think it's exciting, right? Because this is what makes us engineers, because we see stuff like this and we see the opportunity, and it's something to get excited about.
Right.
Yeah, I'm bullish. We're going to solve it because there's just so much hunger for it, and there's so much urgency behind it that, a lot of time, a lot of energy is going to go into addressing exactly the challenges you're getting at. They're not unsolvable challenges, but I just think it'll be a lot of the work is very much getting from the demo to the reality. That's where I think we have a role to play. I think a lot of other parts of the stack as well, and it'll be. The other thing is, for me, what I love about this moment is how often do you get to change the stack so decisively? It's sort of a once in a generation opportunity to do some cool stuff. And so if you're into tools, if you're into systems or infrastructure, right? Like what a moment. Because the things that get sorted out over the next year or two, I think will be with us for a long time. Mm-hmm. And it's a chance to make a mark. It's a chance to help a lot of people, chance to lift up the industry. That's a big motivation for us to get it right.
So is the Apollo MCP available for devs to start working with and trying out today?
Yeah, it's in preview. I think by the time this is out on the internet, we'll have done some more announcements, and it'll be an ongoing thing for us. We really try to just continuously listen to the community. Going back to the very beginning of Apollo Client, we didn't feel like we had all the answers, but we really prioritized the community, and we used to talk about it as by the community for the community. So we're not afraid to put some things out there that have question marks, rough edges. I think that's kind of where the interesting work happens. And but what I'm confident about is MCP is here to stay. The idea that LLMs are going to use it to talk to the APIs is here to stay. So that gives us a pretty clear mandate to go run with this and improve it every week.
So what kind of tips or suggestions would you have for people who are interested in getting started with it and kind of seeing what it can do for them?
Well, if you add all the stuff up we've talked about, the idea that you can use Apollo without changing your APIs, the idea that AI can navigate a schema on its own, it all adds up to a pretty compelling, first experience. So I've got a lot of thoughts about the things to have in mind or like the way to approach this. And we'll keep writing that down as we get more clarity. But I would be more in a play around mindset. Like I think a lot of the magic is in just trying some different things, because it's all about how it fits into your app or your experience. And if you've got to like take your AI certification course before you start, working with this stuff, I just think it's a turnoff. Like that's not the way we want the world to work. The cool thing about infrastructure is it can bake in the protection that you most need so that it's not top of mind for you at the beginning. I think we see that over and over with good, declarative infrastructure. So, the Apollo way of doing this should get you there quickly. And that's our goal. We want this to be the fastest way for you to build an agent on top of APIs you've got. But you should also be confident that you're doing it in a safe way. And there's a lot to learn, but you don't have to block your work on learning all that stuff, right? You can get to that as you get to it. And I think the more we can keep that front and center for people so that they're not fearful, and you can let the creativity part of your motivation really lead the way for a while. I think that's the way to get furthest, because demos are what really, we could talk about the technical milestones between like a POC and a production app, but the other milestone is the financial one. Like you got to convince your boss or your organization to prioritize something. And a demo is by far the best way to do that, right? Like, look what we can do. Look what's possible. So I would push to like make something cool. And then we'll help you get the rest of the way.
I think that's one good news. One thing you have going for you is this is a very demo-friendly technology. So
exactly,
I've had to demo some non-demo friendly technology to make a sales pitch, and I think I'd rather do AI and MCP for sure.
Yeah, and the graph too. Like graphs are visual. They're easy to like get your hands around. I think there's more we could do on that front on the tooling, but we've got some stuff that tries to bring some of that alive. One of my favorite examples, if you're a GraphQL user and you're building an app, you can add a command to your GraphQL query called defer. And it's just 6 characters, right? @defer. And what it does is it tells the system part of the query doesn't have to show up synchronously. I don't want it to block rendering. And this is such a common pattern in UIs, right? Like I've got master detail view, or I've got like, a product page for a retail company. I definitely don't need the recommended other products to show up on the screen before I paint the screen. And if you think about all the gnarly code that gets written by hand to make that good, or if you think about all the janky apps you use because they didn't have time to write that code and they're slow and they're buggy, GraphQL is just night and day for that stuff. That stuff is so fun to play with. And I think like it demos well, it demos to your buddies well, it demos to your we see a lot of teams doing like brown bags or like lunch and learns or whatever. Like, I don't think it's wrong to sort of build a whole roadmap around what shows up best at the Wednesday lunches. And there's just a ton of cool AI MCP stuff that fits that bag, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I was watching one of your videos from a couple of months ago where you talked about the connectors and Graph OS and things like that. And just seeing again the GraphQL playground and the additions to it, like the ability to debug API calls and the ability to see responses, that kind of stuff is so nice. Swagger endpoints are awesome. People love them because they look good and you can see the data. And GraphQL has the same thing, and it's so much nicer than look at my command line. Check out what this terminal just spit out. Let me zoom in so you can actually see some of this non-pretty print JSON here.
We have a trio of like things we aspire to whenever we ship stuff. One is time to value. It's for a developer, you got to get them somewhere useful fast. One of them is architectural conviction. A developer should know at first touch that this is going to work for them down the road, because who doesn't want to think ahead, right? Who doesn't want to plan for a successful future? And the third one is it's got to have joy. Nobody wants to use crappy stuff. Nobody wants to. They might have to sometimes, but it's never what you want, right? And if you get all three of those in the box, it's really special. I think that's the way to get something to really spread, because you want to use it more. You might want to switch jobs if you can't use it where you're working now, right? Stuff. I don't mean to tell everybody to quit their job, but yeah. So
awesome.
That's our take.
Well, Matt, this has been a great chat. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you really wanted to make sure you mentioned, or that we talked about a bit?
Well, I really wanted to get into the intricate query planning semantics. No, I'm fine. No, I'm glad, like we said earlier, there's a conception of GraphQL that's not wholly inaccurate among app devs, that it's only for big stuff. And so meeting the reality of today is super important. And I think, conversations like this help us a lot understand how people think about it. And it's a message we're eager to spread.
Awesome. Well, with that, why don't we transition and talk about stuff that's making us happy?
Yeah.
And we play some music for this too. I should have warned you, but here we go. All right. Paige, what's making you happy this week?
This week, I am going to pick the Pitt TV series. Have either of you had a chance to watch it?
No.
All right. Well, if you like drama and you like doctors and you don't mind blood and emergency rooms, then you will really, really like The Pitt, because it's almost like a season of 24, but set in an ER in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, the whole thing is like one day, right?
Yes, it's one shift. So it's from 7 a.m. in the morning until midnight or something like that. I mean, it is, and it just, it starts off high octane and it just keeps getting higher the longer that the day progresses. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend it if you're looking for something to just put on in the background or kind of wind down. But if you want to be glued to your TV and like biting your nails because you can't look away and you want to see what's going to happen next, this is definitely worth a watch for you.
Awesome. So what's making me happy this week is a book. I normally don't pick or talk about books on this show until I finish them, just in case they turn out bad. But the premise of this one was so good and the topic is so topical, I had to bring it up. So the book's title is I Think I Was Murdered. And the premise from this book is a woman who works at an AI startup. Her husband dies and tragically dies. She makes an AI chatbot of her husband. So it's got a little bit dystopian here based off his messages and whatnot. And then as she gets addicted to talking to her husband's chatbot tells her, I think I was murdered. And then starts like, it's very interesting how it plays out. And it's a little Black Mirror dystopian, but the premise hooked me, and I'm like a few chapters in. And so I will update our listeners as I get further into this and to see if it actually turns out any good. But I thought that premise was pretty fascinating, actually.
Very timely. Yeah.
Matt, what is making you happy this week?
God, I don't have the blood or guts or murder. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I taught her how to ride a bike. My wife was out of town for a week, and so I decided we'll have a little project. And I don't know if you know about when I was a kid, you learned to bike with training wheels, and it takes a long time. And these days they have these balance bikes, so kids can kind of scoot around on this little thing, and it doesn't have any pedals. So I put her on a little pedal bike, and it's super comical because, she's too small for any of this stuff, but they can do it. And I guess to the AI point, you can watch the neural net get trained in real time. It's incredible. Figuring out how to balance, how to turn, how to not fall over, all these weird dynamics. And I don't know, the human brain is amazing. And like, you know, the kids giggling and smiling and they're happy. So I'm happy. But yeah, that's my moment for the week.
It's super fun. One thing, so I have 2 kids, and one thing I learned from them is that it's far easier for kids to learn things like this because the cost of failing for kids is much lower, because if they fall off their bike, they just get right back up. Whereas once you reach adulthood, you fall off, and man, you might not get back up, or at least you don't get back up very easily, because our kids, we have a small little hill in our front yard, and it's just grass. And so they learn by just going down this hill, and, you know, if they fall, they just go right back up to the top of the hill and try again. And it was pretty fun. That's a really fun age.
Yeah, they get pretty envious of each other too. They'll see one kid doing something and it's like, I'm going to do this. It's like, you're half the size. Like, you're not, this is,
yeah.
But you know, they're dogging about it.
My nephews are like that. I have one who's 9, and then his younger brother's 3. And so the 3-year-old sees the 9-year-old doing everything. He's on bikes, he's kicking soccer balls, he's climbing onto the little garden shed in the back to jump off. So the 3-year-old is immediately doing it as well. It doesn't matter that his brother's twice his size and, 6 years older. He's just going to follow right along.
Sky's the limit.
Yep.
Well, Matt, this has been a blast. Last question for you. If people want to follow you, keep up with you, that sort of thing, is there a good place for that? Something we should throw in the show notes for that?
Yeah, our stuff's at apollo.dev, and I'm in all the usual places on the internet. We're excited to have people check it out and let us know where we can make things better.
Awesome. Well, this has been a blast. I'll remind everybody, too, all of our social stuff for Front End Fire, that's all in the show notes as well. We're on the socials. We got our email down there and all that stuff, so feel free to reach out there as well. And thanks one last time, Matt, for joining us. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we will see you next week.
Yep.
Thanks.
See you next
Appreciate
time.
it.